Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to Wednesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. I've been racking my brains like the rest of you on what James Gunn has planned for Superman and his Superman movie that he's actually been writing for quite a few months now. Now, on multiple occasions, James Gunn has teased All-Star Superman. Again, yesterday, he posted a picture of his morning coffee with the All-Star Superman comic book graphic novel opened up. So this is more than, he's basically teased this graphic novel so many times. So does this mean he's definitely going to adapt this graphic novel into a movie? Not necessarily, although he's hinting something here. Now, All-Star Superman is probably one of the greatest, best Superman graphic novels, one of the greatest Superman superhero stories ever told. There's a lot of challenges in adapting this Superman graphic novel. Now, in terms of Superman movies, they've never adapted or attempted to adapt any of the graphic novels. Now, in Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice, Zack Snyder loosely adapts the death of Superman and The Dark Knight Returns. Now, as much as I love BVS, I don't like that idea. I don't like chucking elements of great graphic novels in an original movie. I would rather he adapted The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman separately. And I think most of us can agree, whether we love BVS or not, that killing off Superman in the second adventure in the DC Extended Universe wasn't the best of ideas, but also not the best of ideas chucking in two graphic novels, loosely adapting them in one movie, and it just cheapens, the iconography of said graphic novels. And I don't want James Gunn to do this here. I don't want him to loosely adapt All-Star Superman. You either do it or you don't do it. But really, All-Star Superman is a story of the last chapter of Superman's life. I don't know enough about the comics to tell you if this is really the final chapter. Obviously, this wasn't the last Superman story ever told, but this is the story of how he dies within this story. It's very emotional, it's very compelling in terms of his relationship with Lois, but it's also very compelling in his relationship with Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is arrested at the beginning of this story for crimes against humanity, and he's sentenced to execution. But Lex Luthor has a plan. We also have these brilliant scenes in prison of Clark Kent interviewing Lex Luthor as a journalist. So it would be a very, very interesting kind of movie, a graphic novel to adapt. I think it's challenging. I think it's a difficult story to tell. I mean, especially if James is attempting to tell this as the first Superman movie, considering this is a Superman story where he dies. And you can't really mess around with this graphic novel, because as graphic novels go, it's one of the best Superman stories, superhero stories ever told. This is not really a typical superhero, supervillain, battle-y type of story. I mean, really, yes, Lex Luthor is the villain of this story, and he also isn't. You could argue that there really isn't a villain to this story. It depends how you see Lex Luthor's role in All-Star Superman. It's a very intelligent, methodical, emotionally written story, and could have only been written by someone who absolutely adores Superman. Considering he's dying in this movie, or not movie, but story, it's not really a grotesquely depressing story, but it is very tear-jerky. It's very emotional to think that your hero is dying, and it made me think that, he's not called Superman because he's got superpowers. He's called Superman because he's literally a Superman, a good man. That's what I think he is. That's why I aspire to be like Superman in terms of his heart and his soul and his personality. I failed miserably in my life to be like Superman. No one could ever succeed at all of those ideals, but the moment you stop trying, that's when you fail as a human being. He's the one character who's pure, who's good, and he doesn't want people to, look up to him and say, oh, you're the best Superman. He wants people to stand with him. He wants to be an inspiration. So I don't think, definitely James Gunn's going to adapt this story, although he's hinting heavily with this story. He's clearly a fan. But I've spoken about James Gunn giving these out-of-context teases, but when it comes to All-Star Superman, I'll swallow it up. I'll give him love because it's a great story, and him loving this story, and he claims he's read this on multiple occasions. He's a big fan. So if he was to adapt this, I would be so hyped, and I would never go to sleep until the release date of this potential movie. Now, I was thinking about this. Is he hinting about adapting this movie, or is he going to write a continuation of this movie? Of this graphic novel? Obviously, Superman does die. You don't see a dead body or anything, but he's dead. Now, Lex Luthor has created a cocktail that can give someone the powers of Superman. It gives him the powers of Superman. That's how he avoids execution. Now, in the end of this story, he gives the scientist the cocktail, the patented cocktail. Now, the idea is that basically, if you were to artificially inseminate a woman, and she was, I suppose, I don't know how it would work, but you could create another Superman, a child. Now, I would assume this cocktail would also have Superman's DNA. I'm not sure if it would have Lex Luthor's, and I'm assuming, and I don't think they did a sequel graphic novel to All-Star Superman, but ultimately I think they would artificially inseminate, or at least make that offer to Lois Lane for her to be the womb that's used to create this super child, this super being. I suppose it could be a version, in a way, of Connor Kent, who is Superboy in DC. So could James Gunn be telling this story? I have been hinting about maybe him telling a story of a Superboy rather than Superman. But if he is adapting All-Star Superman, you could have the kind of an older Superman doing this story. Then he tells the story of his next of kin. There's lots of interesting elements in All-Star Superman in terms of him being able in the Fortress now to see the future and to see future generations of his DNA. And so that's an interesting element. He also talks about in this graphic novel how he's nearly found a way of predicting the future so he can stop crimes before they happen. Now, that's an interesting, controversial concept as well. I don't know if James Gunn will be looking to adapt that. But certainly very difficult to take All-Star Superman as your first movie in your new DC Universe franchise and make that movie, considering Superman in this story has been around for a long time. And ultimately, at the end of this story, he dies. I can't wrap my head around it as much as I would like to see this adaptation. And clearly, James has already told us that he's creating a franchise in movies, gaming, animation, and television, and basically telling one story through these different DC movies, TV shows, games, and animation. So that's an interesting thing. We also haven't spoken about, we've spoken about a lot, trying to predict the man's plans, but we really haven't spoken about his animation and what kind of animated stories he's looking to tell within this one DC Universe story as well. Now, DC via Bruce Timm have got a great history and legacy with animation, so it'll be interesting what he's attempting to do there. But I think All-Star Superman would be a great graphic novel to adapt into a film, but it wouldn't be easy. In a lot of ways, rereading this graphic novel, this story has James Gunn written all over it. Excuse me. It's got lots of trappings of the kind of comedy he likes. I think there's lots of interesting facets that have got James Gunn written all over it. So I think this, if any graphic novel has James Gunn written all over it. It's certainly All-Star Superman, and I think there wouldn't be a Superman fan that wouldn't be excited about this. Now, in the past, when they've attempted to adapt graphic novels, they've done a piss-poor job at it. In terms of Captain America and Civil War, that's not really a faithful adaptation. They don't do faithful adaptations. There's very few faithful adaptations out there. I mean, someone might be able to point out one, but I can't think of one either in Marvel or DC, and I could be wrong there. Maybe you need to knock on my head and say, well, what about that one, Mick? And I'll say, oh yeah, silly me. So adapting graphic novels faithfully isn't something that Hollywood do or do well or have any interest in doing. But I think if James Gunn did adapt All-Star Superman, it would be great, but it doesn't make sense to what he said prior. And the man hasn't actually said he's adapting this graphic novel, but he keeps on heavily hinting about this graphic novel, certainly telling us that he loves it. Yeah, I mean, I can't see it myself, considering he's casting a younger Superman, although Superman really, I suppose, comparatively looks young because he doesn't really age, or he ages really, really slowly. So maybe he just wants someone to look slightly younger, to look 30. I don't know what the idea is of casting a younger Superman, and we don't know how young of a Superman this is going to be. As I said earlier, he's not doing an origin story because people are kind of fed up of the Superman origin story. But All-Star Superman has a kind of a Lex Luthor narration at the beginning, talking about this element of kind of Superman's origins, very quickly going through them. And I think that's an interesting way of doing it, because it kind of tells you, and it tells the normies of who Superman is and how he came to Earth. So that's a really quick way of depicting Superman's origin without going back to Krypton. But there's lots of great Kryptonian elements in All-Star Superman as well. I'm just not sure how you do this as a first story. So logically, I'm saying he's not going to adapt this story, but he certainly keeps on hinting about this story. And as I say, he may be attempting a continuation to this story, where it's a new Superman, using this kind of cocktail that Lex Luthor created to create a new super being that really is the offspring of Superman. But do you kick off a brand new DC universe by telling the story of how Superman heroically dies and you create another super being? Can that work? And why would you do this? Why would you want a DC universe without the actual Superman? These are questions that have to be answered. Of course, if they're going with Ta-Nehisi Coates' Clark Kent of colour, it can make sense why James may be trying to kill off the OG Clark Kent and basically creating an offspring of Superman. So, I think people would be very excited with an adaptation of All-Star Superman. I just don't see how it works. It works within the first movie if James adapts it faithfully and loyally, but what you do after you've killed the character off. It's the kind of story you could tell as the conclusion of your DC Universe story, as the conclusion of your Superman story, because it's a great way to end the Superman story, because he dies in such a heroic way. I just don't see, because this is going to be an interconnected franchise, how you tell that story and how you go forward with Superman, unless you mess with that story and you don't kill him off in the end. And I think people would have issues with such a great, iconic graphic novel being messed around with. So, I mean, the logical part of my mind is saying there's no way he's adapting this story. But maybe he's hinting at this story for different reasons. Maybe there's another reason that he's adapting this story. And maybe he's adapting portions of this story. I'm really losing my voice and it's becoming really annoying. I do apologise. But could he be taking facets of this story to be using in his movie. That may be what he's attempting to do. Maybe taking elements of this story to use it for his movie. Now, as I said earlier, I don't like this. I don't like the fact that Snyder uses Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman, elements of those stories in BVS, because, as I say, it just cheapens those graphic novels, because those graphic novels should be adapted faithfully. Now, the problem with adapting the death of Superman faithfully, like the death of Superman, is literally just panels and panels of a slugfest. Now, that would be a very interesting movie. It would also be a very, very short movie. It probably would work as an episode of a TV show more than a movie. So it's difficult, but you can adapt the death of Superman and the return of Superman into one film, and it could be really compelling. Now, Hollywood don't like faithfully adapting comic stories, comic book graphic novels. There's so many great graphic novels out there, and for me, one of the things we're losing, we've got this great era of superhero movies and superhero franchises. The MCU, the DCEU, the Singer, X-Men verse, all of that. None of them really have successfully adapted any stories. Now, X-Men 3: The Last Stand does try and adapt that kind of story of Jean Grey. I think most X-Men fans will say to you, and I've never read any X-Men graphic novels, comics, I don't think they did a very good job on it, but actually I think the X-Men 3 movie does a better job of it than the other X-Men movie tried to do. And so I think that should be the next evolution of live action comic book movies and adaptions. Maybe start adapting faithfully these graphic novels, because that's how you put butts on seats. You would excite everyone, because there's graphic novels even your normies know and have heard about. And talking about the normies, if we were to adapt, if James Gunn was to adapt All-Star Superman, I think it's a way of attracting the normies to Superman and making the character finally relevant to them. Because there's a lot of ways that Superman becomes relevant to anyone reading this graphic novel or watching the animated movie. If you're not a reader, if you don't have the concentration to read the graphic novel, certainly you should watch the animated movie starring James Denton as Superman and Clark Kent. He does a terrific job. Now, James played Mike Delfino in Desperate Housewives, and he played the character that Terry Hatcher was dating on the show. Now, normally, I mean, when you listen to his voice, you think this isn't a Superman voice. But he does really sum up Superman emotionally in the film with his voice acting work. And I think he does, James does a great job in that role. But I do think there's, positives and negatives about adapting, this movie. In a lot of ways, it would mystify me for him to adapt this movie, considering the character dies. And where do you go after that? There's not many ways you can go after that. And that's the problem with adapting this movie. Now, if James Gunn was in charge of an Elseworld DC live-action universe, then I would say, yeah. But considering I believe that James Gunn is doing a multiversal strategy, and multiverse strategy, maybe he could tell this story, then another version of Superman comes out from the multiverse. In fact, he said that Henry Cavill will no longer be playing Superman. But if you wanted to do an all-star Superman story to give Henry Cavill the send-off he deserves, an all-star Superman movie would be brilliant for Henry Cavill. He would be perfect to be doing this. Could this be what James Gunn's attempting to do, but he's been very economical with the truth? Could he be allowing Henry Cavill to play the all-star Superman version of Kal-El, does this one last movie, then we get a new version of Superman? I mean, obviously, it's highly unlikely, but also maybe James Gunn has been holding out on us, because why does he keep on teasing All-Star Superman beyond any graphic novel? So something's going on in context of All-Star Superman. But me, for one, I wouldn't be opposed to him adapting this story. He's clearly got an idea how, if he was going to adapt this, how he would go forward with Superman in the brand new DC universe. So it's kind of a shame that Henry Cavill won't play Superman anymore, because an all-star Superman story would be perfect for Henry Cavill. And as I say, it would be an emotional, tear-jerky kind of ending for his Superman. I think Henry Cavill has at least one more Superman movie in him, but according to James Gunn and according to the press, that's not going to happen now. But as I say, James Gunn could have been holding out on us all the time, and maybe the younger Superman he's talking about is the one that comes after Henry Cavill's all-star Superman, and maybe this is what he's doing here. If I were you, I wouldn't discount Cavill still being involved in the next film somehow. Obviously, we're going to be getting more information. I'm impatiently awaiting James' announcement and to see what he's actually planning here. But yeah, they're my thoughts about All-Star Superman. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the graphic novel and the animated movie, and would you like James Gunn to adapt the graphic novel? Obviously, there's issues there. How do you go forward? But clearly, if he is going to adapt this, and this could really actually put James Gunn on the map in terms of making a Superman film that people class equally or above the Donner Superman the movie. You know, the one everyone says is the best version of Superman in live action. You know, this could be the moment where someone, you know, in the past 40 years actually makes a better Superman movie than what Richard Donner did with Superman the movie. Because the reason people look up to that movie and say because it's a great, faithful depiction of who Superman is. And basically, All-Star Superman sums up Superman in a beautiful way. It also sums up Lex Luthor because, you know, Lex Luthor is a complicated character. He's not just evil. He's not just, you know, a moustache-twirling villain. There's methods to his madness. He hates Superman because Superman, with his strength, makes him feel weak. He makes him feel inferior. And it's one of the reasons he hates Superman. Superman doesn't want anyone to feel inferior. And because of this inferiority complex that Lex feels he has, because of Superman, it drives him to do a lot of bad things. And it makes him cross the line. And, you know, Clark Kent, you know, says to Lex Luthor when he's interviewing him in prison, it's a shame that you hate him. You two could have been friends. And I think that's amazing. And it made me think of the elements of Smallville where Clark and Lex were once friends before his jealousy of Clark turned him into like the megalomaniacal villain he becomes at the end of his run of Smallville. But if he is going to adapt All-Star Superman, who would you cast as Lex Luthor? Now, someone in my comments the other day, and I do apologise for not liking the comment or replying, is you said to me you hope that someone other than Jesse Eisenberg plays Lex Luthor. I think I can put your fears to bed and say that there's no chance in high heaven that Jesse Eisenberg will ever return as Lex Luthor unless Zack gets to continue his story in the DC Extended Universe. In his DC Extended Universe, Snyderverse. Jesse will not be James Gunn's Lex Luthor, and even Jesse has said he can't see himself playing Lex Luthor again, although he said he would love to and adapt his performance to what the fans want him to do. So I think that's very gentlemanly of Jesse, considering people in the industry today who get very upset by being criticised. Jesse has never done that, and he got a lot of criticism. I think people recognise that Jesse Eisenberg is one of this generation's great indie actors, and he's had so many great performances in independent films, just not the Lex Luthor casting they were expecting or wanting. I believe because All-Star Superman does tell the story of how Superman dies, I think finally this would be the perfect opportunity to cast Michael Rosenbaum, who played the best live-action Lex Luthor of all time. Michael Rosenbaum would be perfect for for this role, because ultimately Michael has been the one who gave Lex Luthor so much nuance, and Lex Luthor in All-Star Superman has got so much nuance, and you need that depth. And I think you don't necessarily have to say this is Smallville canon, you just have him playing Lex Luthor. Michael Rosenbaum and James Gunn are very close friends. If I was James Gunn, I would be taking advantage of this friendship and this connection with him. I think he would be perfect. I can't think. There's only one other actor, if you really want a comic book accurate Lex Luthor, and that's Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays Kingpin in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in the Netflix Daredevil, and the one who will be playing Kingpin in the Disney Plus Daredevil show as well. So I think, you know, for me, it's either Michael Rosenbaum or Vincent D'Onofrio. I can't see anyone else playing a better Lex Luthor. And I know some people, there are some other fan picks. I just don't like them. I've said on previous videos, I don't like Billy Zane. He's a fan casting. I like Billy Zane as an actor. He's fantastic in Titanic. He's a great actor in other stuff that he's done. But for me, just because there's pictures of him bald, was it Tom Hanks we saw bald the other day, or someone else, and they were saying he made a great Lex? Just because you look okay bald, I mean, I look okay bald, but I can't play Lex Luthor. I'd love to play Lex Luthor. I'd gobble that role up, but never going to happen. So I think that Michael Rosenbaum would be perfect. The fans have been chomping at the bit. The issue is with Michael, you know, since he's left Smallville and tried a couple of projects that really didn't work out for him, he hasn't really acted that much. He hasn't been part of the industry. And right now, he does his podcasts. He does his Talkville podcast once a week with former Clark Kent, Smallville Clark Kent, iconic Clark Kent, Tom Welling, where they talk about different episodes of Smallville each week. You should check it out. If you're a Smallville fan or a Superman fan, it's really awesome. So Michael really isn't that involved in the industry. But I'll tell you what, if you want proof that he's a great actor, just see his role, any episode where he played Lex Luthor in Smallville. He was tremendous. And he would be awesome again. Now, I don't know what James Gunn is thinking in terms of Lex Luthor, but it's a great opportunity. I think this would be a kind of that rare element of nepotism, if you like, where, you know, someone in Hollywood casts a friend and you could say, actually, I like this casting. It would be very, very exciting. Some people will criticize it and say it's going to confuse people, but it's not confusing whatsoever. Rosenbaum is a great actor. He's proven he can play a great Lex Luthor, and this would be the perfect DC project as Lex Luthor for Michael. This would be perfect. Now, Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays Kingpin in the MCU, would be even better because he really looks like the Lex Luthor from the Superman animated series, I think from the early 90s or late 90s or whatever it was. He absolutely would be the perfect comic book Lex Luthor. I'm just not sure if he would do it. I mean, I think he said in the past he would do it, but I think he's a very busy actor, and if he's back on Daredevil, it would be difficult. But I know that actors can do more than one project at a time, so that would be feasible. But they would be the two actors that I would be looking to play Lex Luthor in DC Universe. And I think Lex Luthor is very important who you pick to play Lex, because he ain't just going to be in the Superman movies. He's going to play a big role, I'm sure of it, if it's up to James, in the whole DC Universe. He's an important character. He's a bit like Amanda Waller. He can show up in a Batman movie. He can show up in a, you know, Flash movie, any movie. He's very important to the integral DC comic stories as well. So you must pick the right actor. There can be no mistakes with Lex. And I think Jesse Eisenberg was certainly a controversial choice. Not just in terms that you wouldn't pick him in terms of looks. I think the way they got him to portray Lex Luthor, the way Snyder got him to portray the character, I mean, I like the elements of it. It's not very faithful in terms of body language and the way he speaks. But there's elements of the character, I suppose, that you say, yeah, that's Lex from the comics. It just wasn't a popular pick. It wasn't like Ben Affleck, where people sneered when he was cast, But when we actually saw him as Bruce Wayne and Batman, we said, you know what? That's a great pick. We were wrong about him. I don't think there's anyone saying we were wrong about Jesse Eisenberg. I think he gave a tremendous performance. He's just not Lex Luthor. It's as simple as that. So that's today's video. Do you think that's what we're getting, an all-star Superman adaptation for this Superman movie that James Gunn's writing? I would be absolutely in favour of this, but how you do this as the first Superman movie in a brand new universe, I simply do not know. This has been Wednesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.